WikiLeaks did a remarkable and comprehensive investigation of a program that very few people had actually heard of, in which USAID has created a massive coordinated network of media outlets all throughout the world that are designed to falsely appear to be independent, but which in fact are there to disseminate US propaganda, to bring division and discord to all sorts of countries, to enable the United States to exploit the rest of the world for its own ends. And not only is that sinister unto itself and unknown to the public, it's actually something they're quite poor at accomplishing. Here is WikiLeaks on February 8th reporting this, quote, USAID has purchased nearly $500 million, $472.6 million, through a secretive US government-financed NGO called Information Network, IN, which has, quote, worked with 4,291 media outlets, producing in 1 year 4,799 hours of broadcast, reaching up to 778 million people, and, quote, training over 9,000 journalists. This network has also supported social media censorship initiatives. And there you see the graphic, called the Internews Network. These always have very generic sounding names, not to raise any alarm, to fly under the radar, for people not to really even notice that they exist. And you can see here in this graphic, it says the recipient is associated with multiple parents in the data set Internews Network. And the total awarded amount is $472.6 million from 457 transactions. The WikiLeaks report goes on. Quote, the operation claims offices in over 30 countries, including main offices in the US, London, Paris, and regional headquarters in Kiev, Bangkok, and Nairobi. It is headed up by Jean Bergolt, who pays herself $451,000 a year. Bergolt worked out of the US Embassy in Mexico during the early 1990s, where she was in charge of a $250 million budget and in other revolts or conflicts at critical times before formally rotating out of 6 years at USAID to this network. Her IN bio and those of other key people and board members have been recently scrubbed from the website, but remain accessible at http://archive.org. Reports show the board being co-chaired by Democrat Securecrat Richard J. Kessler and Simone Otis Cox, wife of NVIDIA billionaire Trench Cox, both major Democratic donors. In 2023, supported by Hillary Clinton, Bergolt launched a $10 million IN fund at the Clinton Global Initiative. The IN page shows a picture of Bergolt at the CGI, has also been deleted. And there you see the image. Internews launches new $10 million fund supporting independent media at 2023 Clinton Global Initiative. Now, let me just say for a second here. First of all, the fact that we have this gargantuan network of media collectives all throughout the world with such massive funding that essentially nobody has ever heard of, in and of itself demonstrates the reason why these kinds of revelations that are happening only because of this Doge investigation are so crucial. But does anyone believe that the Clinton Foundation is actually interested in promoting genuinely independent media outlets that are funded by the US government? Obviously, it's an oxymoron for a media outlet to receive funding directly or indirectly from the US government, either straight from the US government or through the Clinton Initiative, and at the same time declare itself to be independent. And yet so much of the reporting has warned in the United States that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are targeting independent journalists and independent media outlets by cutting the budget of USAID, as if a media outlet could possibly be independent if it's receiving money from an arm of the US security state. WikiLeaks goes on, quote, IN has at least 6 captive subsidiaries under unrelated names, including one based out of the Cayman Islands. Since 2008, when electronic records began, more than 95% of IN's budget has been supported by the U.S. government. USAID and state funneled nearly $500 million through this building, which is at 876 7th Street, Arcata, California. The IRS and ING government contracts list this address as the current registered address for IN, although it was clearly abandoned by December 2024. Here's a shot taken 4 months ago, and you can see the building actually shuttered. So just that fact alone, that the United States government has been building and constructing and proliferating and financing the Internews Network that has tentacles all over the world, some of which are administered through the Clinton Foundation, others of which are just directly funded by the US government, for me, in and of itself, makes what the Trump administration is doing and digging into these agencies sufficiently valuable to justify. But there's so much more to it. Here's from ProPublica in 2024. There you see Internews Network designated as a 501c3, and you see the text of the IRS document. And here is the report showing that it had $124 million in revenue in 2023, total assets of $32.8 million, and expenses of $123 million. So it's spending all of the money that it's taking in on this propaganda effort on behalf of the US government in countries all throughout the world. And you can see there not just the amount itself, but you can see the trend lines here of how this budget has gone up in the last 10 years. It's kind of a straight up curve. It started at around $50 million, then it went to $100 million, now it's at $124 million. So that's one of the other aspects of these sorts of opaque institutions that nobody pays attention to, nobody really understands what's going on in them. They operate as their own independent entities, is that they constantly just grow through sheer inertia without really much of any controls taking place. And this was one of the central themes of the Trump campaign, which I think the people surrounding Donald Trump learned more than anything else after his first term, which is that there's this entire deep state, this entire administrative state that operates unto itself with no democratic accountability. They believe they run themselves. They believe they have their own rules. And that's why there's so much angst and upset and anger that we've seen when elected officials from the executive branch, we just had a major national election. It lasted 2 years. Billions and billions of dollars spent on this election. Donald Trump wins. He brings in his team into the White House, into the administration and the executive branch. He deploys the people he's asked to perform these functions that he said he would carry out. And the reaction of these agencies are, who are you to come and supervise what we're doing, to try and control what we're doing? You don't run us. And it's true. The political branches have not run these agencies. They run themselves. That's what a deep state is. That's what an administrative state is. And it's an incredibly anti-democratic component of our government. They operate with no transparency, no accountability, no supervision. And this is the first time, I guess you could go back to the Church Committee when the Senate finally investigated a lot of what was going on. When in the 60s and 70s, so many of the abuses came to the fore, and the Senate decided it needed to find out what these agencies are doing. That's 50 years ago, 45 years ago. So finally, there's now an attempt again to get a hold of this administrative state, and it's the Democratic Party that, among all the things Trump is doing, apparently found the most passion to oppose. They actually went to the USAID building and shook their canes that old people carry, that so many of the Democratic members of Congress carry because of how elderly they are, how long they've been around. And Chuck Schumer led a chant outside of it. This is what they are choosing to defend, the right of these agencies to continue operating autonomously and with no democratic accountability, even though they have their tentacles all throughout the world. Here's just some of the compensation of the officers who are the top paid officers for this internet news network. There you see the CEO paid $412,000, and there's Janine Bogal, who is a major Democratic donor, whose husband is the billionaire founder of NVIDIA, paid almost $400,000 as well. Now, here is a biography of Janine Bourgault. There you see her picture. And her bio reads that her media experiences with Wired and The Guardian, and she's the president and CEO of East Blue Hill MIE, and she is there the president of the CEO for Internews as well. And her bio says, Bourgault is an expert on the role of information and media in developing, conflict, and post-conflict and fragile countries. She speaks on issues of global news, information technology, media development, and democracy assistance worldwide. Bourgault leads the strategic management of the Internews and its programs, now active in more than 50 countries. She has overseen Internet news growth in areas underserved by local media, such as Afghanistan and South Sudan, and worked internationally in countries undergoing dramatic shifts in media and political landscapes. Bourgault worked in the former Yugoslavia, serving as a strategic advisor for media development programs in post-war Kosovo, as well as a manager of community development projects in Serbia and Montenegro through the fall of Slobodan Milosevic. She served for 6 years with the U.S. Agency for International Development, including 3 years at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. So basically, a government spook, going to all the places where the U.S. is trying to manipulate the outcome of various political conflicts through propaganda. That's exactly who she is. That's what her career is, and that's what this Internews, this massively funded Internews, is designed to do. Here you can see from the Twitter account Data Republican, which is a really reliable Twitter account that does some great work in data. If you haven't seen it, the Internews Network at the center of all of this, and there you see its gross receipts $123 million. It receives about $30 million in contributions, another $5.5 million in grants, and then $93 million in taxpayer funds. And obviously, very few people have any idea of what it's doing, but what you know it's doing is spreading propaganda in all sorts of conflict zones and the internal affairs of countries all over the world. Here's an interview that she gave back at the World Economic Forum, unsurprising that she would be found there, in January of 2024, just to give you a sense for who this person is. Remember, almost nobody knew about this. This is all happening inside the U.S. government in buildings and agencies that basically operate completely unto themselves, at least until very recently. Here's part of what she had to say.
Disinformation makes money, and that's one of the. We need to follow that money, and we need to work with in particularly the global advertising industry. That a lot of those dollars go to pretty bad content, and so you can work really hard on exclusion lists or inclusion lists to sort of really try to focus ad dollars and challenge the global advertising industry all around the world to focus their ad dollars towards the good news and information, the accurate and relevant news and information.
Needless to say, she's one of these people who talks in terms of disinformation. Do you actually think that's what the U.S. government's primary objective is when they're operating in Serbia and Kosovo and Russia and all of these other conflict zones where the United States has serious interest? Oh, we're just trying to make sure that the media there is accurate. We just want it to be accurate. We don't have any interest beyond that. Johns Hopkins Magazine, all the way back in May of 2006, talked about the early history of Internews. Quote, in the 1990s, Internews began to attract serious money. George Soros and his Open Society Institute became supporters, as did eventually the Knight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and dozens of others. USAID has made the large grant to establish the Russian Independent Television Network. Evelyn Messenger secured a large sum from the National Endowment for Democracy to study independent media in Eastern Europe. Internews secured $8 million to set up a media center, a news agency, and a broadcast and print outlet in Ukraine. Quote, it changed just about everything, recalls Makino. We became a lot more effective because we could hire staff and cover a lot more ground. We also had to become much more professional. Messenger, who eventually would have a falling out with Hoffman, didn't like some of the changes. Quote, the first phase of Internews was really a lot of fun, she said. We'd come up with little bits of money and do things all pretty ad hoc, but then the organization began structuring itself around getting money from the government. David really loved it, and I'm sure he still does. She felt that accepting so much government support limited Internews' flexibility. Quote, there was now an intersection between the political interest of the U.S. and the work we were doing. Oh, you don't say. So all the way back in 2006, people who thought they were creating this little fun startup to help independent news outlets started getting major amounts of funding from Open Society and the Soros Foundation and eventually the government. Now, obviously, they realized once you start getting massive amounts of money from the government, you're no longer independent. You're a servant of their foreign policy agenda. You're no longer interested in disseminating actual news. You're disseminating propaganda inside countries in order to destabilize them or manipulate them in exactly the way that the United States pretends it never does and only Russia does to it. Is this really the sort of thing that the United States government ought to be doing, especially if you think it is? Shouldn't there be a lot of transparency around it, a lot of understanding of what it's actually doing? The only reason we have any now is because Elon Musk has been sending in his Doge team to demand access to understand what actually it is that they're doing. Here from May of 2007, so you can see kind of how long this development has been going on, is a map of all the places in which this Internews exists. And all the colored countries there are places where Internews has become active. And again, this is quite a long time ago, back in 2007, and you can see how pervasive, how widespread throughout the world the United States propaganda scheme is. Almost 2 billion people, 2 billion across the world enjoy a cup of coffee as a part of everyday life. But how many of these people, those 2 billion, get to drink great coffee? You don't have to suffer the side effects of low quality coffee, anxiety, insomnia, jitters, acidic stomach aches, headaches, even heart palpitations. Real quality coffee doesn't have these side effects. That's why I drink 1775 coffee. It's what coffee should taste like and how it should make you feel. Your cup of coffee every morning can be much better with 1775 coffees. Single farm, high altitude, hand picked. No old beans, no mixed origins, no mold, fillers, or dangerous chemicals. It's coffee that helps you sleep better, feel better, and give you the energy and focus coffee was meant to deliver. Try it for yourself. If you don't love your first cup, it is on us. Send it back for a full refund, not the actual cup, but the coffee. No questions asked. Go to 1775coffee.com and use the promo code Glenn for 15% off. Plus, every purchase enters you for a chance to win a Tesla and $30,000 in cash. Go to 1775coffee.com today and improve your morning routine while supporting the cause of free speech of Rumble as well. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.